Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar on the DC School Garden Grant for the 2019-2021 grant cycle. Happy that you all are able to join. Just a few housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and archived. It will be posted on the School Garden Grant webpage. The URL for that webpage is located at the bottom of the slide. Also, for any questions that folks may have during this webinar, there are two ways to ask questions. One is to type your question into the question field on the webinar. And the second is to hold your question until I unmute everybody. I'll do that a couple times throughout the webinar, and you can ask your question that way. Lastly, just to remind folks to visit the website. Again, the URL is at the bottom of the screen to get more information about the grant. So my name is Sam Ullery. I'm the School Garden Specialist here at the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, and I'm the grant administrator for the School Garden Grant. Really excited again to have funds available to do this work. Before we get excited, I just want to give an overview of why we have the OSSI School Garden Grant. And this photo is a perfect example for me of that, because this photo shows the many benefits of the school garden. It shows students using skills from measuring, making observations, using teamwork, and completing activities across subject areas, including math, science, art, and even yoga. So I just want to thank everybody for your work around school gardens and for considering applying for this grant to provide students with these experiences. All right, so here are some important dates for the grant. The RFA, the request for applications, has been released. It is available online. The application deadline is September 4th at 3 p.m. and we will make award announcements before October 1st. This is our, so next I want to provide some background both about the School Gardens program here at OSSI in general to give some context, and then for the grant as well. So the School Garden program was established through legislation about 8 years ago. And since that time, we've seen an increase in the number of gardens, students, and teachers that are engaging in school gardens. We've identified some barriers to gardens, the biggest one being funding and staffing, which may be of a little surprise to folks. So because of those barriers, those identified barriers, and the legislation requiring grants be made available for school garden program, we established the School Garden Grant. And this is the eighth grant cycle. We've been able to award a good amount of money to a good amount of schools and programs since the conception of the grant. And again, using that, knowing that the barriers are staffing and funding, our grant is focused on staffing. There's a lot more information about both the School Garden program and the grant that's available in the Farm to School School Garden reports that are available online if you're interested in knowing more. The purpose of the School Garden Grant mirrors the purpose of the School Garden program. The grant is focused on increasing the number of students and teachers that are engaged in the program, getting outside, getting their hands dirty in the garden. It also, the focus is to increase the number of schools with garden programs and to ensure that those programs are well integrated, sustained, and institutionalized within the garden, within the school, beyond the grant cycle. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about eligibility for the grant. There are two groups that are eligible for this grant. The first group includes all public schools, so that's DC public schools, and all public charter schools. Any DC public school that is interested in applying must reach out to the Office of Federal Programs within DCPS Central Office. The email is provided there, and as well as the deadline. Another group of schools that are another group that is eligible are community-based organizations. Community-based organizations may submit up to 3 applications and may include between 1 and 4 schools per application. Whether a school applies or a CBO applies, there must be a letter of partnership or an agreement between the school and this community-based organization. We've provided in the RFA, there's a service provider list that schools can reference to identify community-based organizations that they may want to partner with. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. Lastly, all schools must have completed, in order to be eligible, the 2017-18 school health profile. There's a contact in the RFA that you can reach out to confirm that your school has completed the school health profile. However, I will say that 99% of all schools have completed this. So most likely you are okay. In terms of the award information, this is a 2-year grant period. It will begin on October 1st, 2019 and end on September 30th, 2021. In year 1 of the grant, grantees must spend a minimum of 40% of the total amount awarded and no more than 60% of the total amount awarded. The maximum award is $35,000 per school, and 80% of that award amount must go towards salaries. Quick note about salaries: we don't dictate or decide what your staffing structure looks like. So it's going to look different depending on what your structure is. For example, some applicants, they dedicate majority, if not all, of their staffing funds to one individual who oversees the program, multiple aspects of the program. Other grantees or applicants divvy up the salaries differently between multiple people, including teachers, school staff, community-based organization staff, and community members. So it's really up to you how you want to do this. There's no right or wrong way. You know what works best for your school and organization. Funds may not be used for travel expenses, field trips, or any type of transportation to field trips. The reason for that is that we have a separate pot of funding that is made available for field trips. If you want more information about that, please contact me directly and I'll get that information to you. Okay, before I move on to what's new, I want to pause and I want to see if there's any questions. So what I'm going to do is unmute everybody on the phone or on the computer. So if you want to go ahead and mute yourself, if there's background noise, please do so now. All right, are there any questions at all at this point before I move on? Great. But feel free, I'll mute everybody. Feel free to type those questions as I go, and I'll try to get to them as I'm going through. All right, so there's some new things to the grant this year. Okay, here's a question. So great question around DC public schools that are interested in applying for the grant and reaching out to the Office of Federal Programs in DCPS Central Office. It can be a very informal email. I think you just need to let them know that you're interested in applying and start that conversation with them before the deadline. So you can just email them and say that you're interested in applying for the OSSI School Garden Grant and you would like for DCPS to submit an application on your school's behalf. All right, so what's new this year? First off, we are, there's going to be more support from OSSI, myself and other team members here at OSSI for applicants. What that's going to look like is in the pre-award phase, we're providing more info sessions, including this one. In the past, we've only done 1 or 2. And also we added an enterprise grants management system training, or EGMS. EGMS is the platform for which you submit applications and reimbursement requests. So if you're new to this training will be really helpful. It took place yesterday, however, on Wednesday. However, it was recorded and archived, and we'll be making that webinar available on the same page as this webinar on the grants page. So look out for that. We're also able to provide more support to schools that are looking to because there is a requirement in the grant to partner with a community-based organization. Many schools, this is a roadblock for them because they're relatively new, and they don't know how to start or where to start with identifying a partner organization. So if you're in that position where you don't have an organization in mind, you don't know who to work with or how to start with that, please reach out to me and I can facilitate that connection and help you think through who would be a good partner that would have programming that's aligned with what you're intending to do through the grant. We're also able to provide, which is probably going to get posted next week, which is why it's important to go back to the website, some case studies of past grant recipients that includes how they implemented the grant, along with specifics regarding some of the deliverables of the grant, so that again, if you're new or you have an existing garden, but this is a new role for you, you can take a look at those case studies and see what others have done to successfully implement the grant. We've also provided some clarification around the minimum number of students that need to be engaged, which is 50. And we provided a definition of what engaged means, which means that those students have been exposed to 10 or more hours of garden-based learning during one school year. We also provided some clarity around the teacher involvement. So in the year 1, there's a requirement that 5 classroom teachers or extracurricular staff must teach at least 5 garden-based lessons per teacher or extracurricular staff. 3 of those teachers must use curriculum that's aligned to relevant standards. That's year 1. And then in year 2, it goes from 5 classroom teachers to 8. So we just provided more clarity, and we added that in addition to classroom teachers, extracurricular staff can count towards the total number of teachers, which will help particularly, I think, with the middle schools and the high schools, where it's a little more challenging sometimes to get the classroom teachers involved. We've updated the training requirements. In the past, we've required that grantees attend trainings, but we've left it largely up to them to decide what those trainings are. This time around, we are establishing a community of practice training module and requiring all applicants to attend those. They'll take place quarterly. We've also layered on a mentor-mentee program where each grant applicant will be assigned a mentor that will be available to assist them in achieving the deliverables of the grant, but also thinking through how to sustain the program beyond the grant cycle. We've added a question to the narrative that will be scored regarding how you're engaging students with disabilities. And lastly, we've added a competitive preference to the pre-award cycle. And I'll talk more about that later on in the slide deck, but that is really important for folks to know about. So I have a question regarding the year 1 expenditures. And so I mentioned that there's a minimum of 40% and a maximum of 60% that need to be spent in year 1. And does that need to be reflected in the budget? That's a great question. So when you're submitting your application, you will see in the EGMS system that we are asking for you to upload your entire 2-year budget as an attachment to the application. And then we are asking you to enter in just your year 1 budget in the grant management system itself. And I'm going to go into the system and show you where that goes in a minute so you have a visual on it. But just to recap, you're going to upload your 2-year budget like as an Excel file or as a Word document, however you're doing it. And then you're going to enter in your year 1 budget into the template that's provided for you in EGMS. Okay. So just to recap this slide, I think most of the things are new or directed at providing more support to applicants and making the deliverables more clear. There's a lot on this slide, and this is all in the RFA, but I just want to touch on a few highlights for the deliverables. So each school should have a school wellness committee, and we want the garden program to be a part of that. So we do have that as a requirement that there needs to be a school wellness committee. Again, we require that there's at least 1 staff position to oversee the program. The focus of this grant is on staffing. We require a collaboration with classroom teachers and that there's students that are engaged. And just to clarify about those classroom teachers, those are teachers that are classroom teachers at the school. They're not teachers that might be a part of the partner organization that are running extracurricular activities outside of the school. Those classroom teachers, the intention is that those are classroom teachers within the school. The extracurricular teachers, those can be part of the CBO or part of the school. But we do want some teachers that are teaching as a part of the school day that are employees of the school. We do require a collaboration between the food service vendor or staff to implement cafeteria-based activities such as taste tests. We can assist with making those connections if you don't already have those through our office. Again, we're going to have trainings. These are going to be community of practice sessions that are required. We're requiring that an entire grade level or at least 50 students engage in a meaningful watershed education experience, also called a MIWE. There's a link to get more information about that. We also have a specialist on staff here at OSSI who can assist you in working that through if you're unfamiliar with it. We require participation in 2 annual OSSI-sponsored events. The first one is Growing Healthy Schools Month, which takes place in October, and Strawberries and Salad Greens Day, which takes place the first Wednesday in June. So it would be really helpful in your application if you talk about what you're going to do to ensure that you participate in these various activities and achieve these requirements, and you speak directly to them. We require that you submit a mid and end project report, and there is a continuation grant application in order to receive year 2 funds that is not nearly as intense as your competitive application that you're submitting for the grant. Lastly, it's important that you maintain a healthy school garden. So there's a school garden safety checklist that we want to make sure that all grantees are following. So there's a question about the school food meal program. So the question is, if the school is a self-op school, makes its own food, it does not have a vendor, are you still required to partner with a vendor? The answer to that is no. Really, we want you to work with the food service program, whatever that is that you have. If you have a vendor, work with a vendor. If food is being prepared and done in-house and it's self-prep, then you work with that staff to make sure that you have cafeteria-based activities happening. Please note that there is a slight variation in deliverables from year 1 to year 2, specifically around the number of teachers that are engaged. So just take a close look at that and make sure that you've that you're not missing anything in the year 2. Okay, so again, all applications must be submitted using the Enterprise Grant Management System, or EGMS. And so what I want to do very briefly is take folks to that page to just do a quick run through of that website for folks that might be unfamiliar, and then also show the grant page where that would be. So if you don't have credentials to the Enterprise Grant Management System, you can, when you go to the EGMS website, which is provided in the RFA, it will ask you for credentials. Again, this is sometimes a point of confusion, so let me just be very clear. If you are a teacher or a staff of a school, whether it's a DCPS school or a public charter school, you will not be able to get credentials to log into the EGMS system. The only individuals that will be able to get credentials are those within the public charter school central office. So your administrators within your public charter school will be able to get credentials, and the central office of DC Public Schools. The other, and community-based organizations, that's not as much of an issue. Those folks within those organizations can gain access and receive credentials to the EGMS system. I just wanted to be clear that if you're a teacher, you're not going to be able to get credentials. That's why you need to reach out to the central office of the charter school or DC Public Schools. Okay, so we'll pretend, just to show you an example, that we are a Capital City Public Charter School and we want to submit an application for the school garden grant. So it won't look exactly like this, but once you get to this page, you want to make sure that you're on the correct fiscal year. You want to make sure that you have your essential data submitted and updated. Here it says it's approved, so you're all set to go. You will need to, if you are new, create your central data. That should be a first thing that you do because that takes the most amount of time to approve. And then you're going to go down to the bottom and you're going to find the available grants that are available. And you'll find here there's a competitive grant. It's the DC School Garden Grant, and you'll enter just a title for that, whatever works for you there. And then you'll create your application. The EGMS system has gotten much better over the years. It can sometimes be a little slow. Just be patient and wait. The more you try to refresh or click, the higher your chances of getting an error. So this is your application. You'll see there's some main tabs at the top here: background information, school eligibility, contact information, etc. And then below that are your sub tabs for each of these main tabs. So right now I'm in background information and I'm looking at general information. I can click through. I'm still in background information. I can look at the award information, etc. This is mostly all information that's taken from the RFA that you can look at. It's also available on as a PDF on our website. You want to go through the school eligibility, which we've already talked about, to make sure that you're eligible. One thing to note is that there's only one grant application per school that's allowable. You will then enter in your contact information. Please note that if you are a CBO applying on behalf of multiple schools, then you can enter in number 2 through 4 here. If you are just submitting for one, you need to enter 1. You press enter, and then you'll enter in the school contact information here. Okay, and then you have your narrative section. There are 4 narrative sections. There's a character limit for each answer, so please do that. Make sure that you're under that. It'll just cut off after the character limit. Here is the supporting documentation upload. There are 4 required documents that you must upload. Please note that number 2 is a detailed 2-year budget for the entire grant period. and then there's a note to only enter 1 year expenses in the detailed planning expenditures tab, which is going to be 40 to 60% of the budget. So this is where your 2-year budget goes. You're also going to upload an agreement between the school and the partner organization. You're going to upload a screenshot or a PDF of the school garden assessment tool that you complete. This is actually something that you can also just upload a confirmation that it was completed, just a note saying this school garden assessment tool has been completed, and then a screenshot of the confirmation that it was completed that you receive through Google Forms once you submit it. That's perfect. And then some photos of your garden, whatever would help your narrative, help further explain your narrative is great. Like if you're going to add new components, or if you're going to build a new garden, or if you want to talk about a specific program that you're doing and you have photos of students doing that, that helps the readers digest and give a richer story about your program. So really think about the images that you're providing. And again, those have to be PDF files. So just make sure that they're in a PDF or Microsoft Word. And then here's your detailed planning expenditures where you will only enter year 1 expenses. So you have some sub tabs here. Most everybody will have a salaries and benefits tab. So you will enter in, person A, that person's name, their position. They might be a teacher, and the program category. They might be providing an instruction, an hourly rate, whatever that would be, and then an example of what. An example of what they're doing. You can provide as much or as little detail here as possible, but please be as descriptive as you can. And then once you do that, and you can calculate totals at the bottom, and it'll automatically calculate that total line item amount. So you need to have a different line for each person, for each individual that is going to be a part of the grant. You may not know yet who it is, because you might need to hire somebody, and you can't do that if you don't know if you have the grant or not. So that's fine if you just want to put as a name with that individual TBD, but then in your description, just be clear that what that person is going to be doing, and then in your narrative, describe the process that you're going to use in order to onboard that person. Like you're going to put out a job description, and then this is, what you're looking for. So you don't need to, and then once you hire that person and if you're awarded, you'll go back in and you'll update, you'll do a budget amendment and include that person's name. And then you're going to go through assurances. Make sure you save every time. There's 3 different assurances here. You need to check on the tabs to do the assurances. And then you will submit your application. Once it's all done, you'll run a consistency check. It'll make sure that you didn't miss anything, any fields. If I run this consistency check now, it's going to come up with a lot of things because I didn't complete the application. And then once your consistency check is complete, there'll be a button that shows up down here. It'll say submit to OSSI. Once you submit to OSSI, it's done. This system will shut down at 3 p.m. on September 4th. Please submit your application. If there's one thing that you remember from this webinar, submit your application early, because what we don't want to happen is that you run into an issue and you can't submit. Sometimes the site is really busy at 2:58 because other people are trying to do things last minute, and it's really slow and it'll kick you off. So just don't do that to yourself. Submit early so that you don't have the stress of getting it in late, and we don't have to tell you that we can't accept your application, because we won't accept late applications. Okay, so I have a question about the attachment and in terms of the agreement, the MOU or letter of commitment. The question is around, so we're using a general term of letter of commitment, and so sometimes you are working with a partner organization. They may require an MOU, they may require something else, So what we're saying is do whatever agreement works for you and your partner organization, and please share that with us. All that we're requiring is that you share that agreement with us that outlines the partnership. We're not saying like it has to be an MOU or it has to be a letter of commitment or it has to be a certain format. We just want to see that there's something formal in place that is an agreement between you and the partner organization. All right. So I'm going to navigate away now from this EGMS page. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so we also have, I mentioned the EGMS training. It'll be available on our website. You can also still register for that, and you will get a notification of where that is archived, just if that is easier for you, to have that email notification saying this webinar has already taken place. To view the archived webinar, click here. We also have a help desk that you can call during regular business hours for any questions related to the Enterprise Grants Management System. Okay, let me actually just unmute folks really quickly to see if there's any questions about EGMS before I move forward. Okay, let's keep going. So the scoring criteria, all applicants that meet the application criteria, okay, so the eligibility criteria, will be reviewed and scored using a quality rubric. This rubric is used by an external review panel to evaluate the quality of the application. The rubric, as you can see here, includes 4 weighted criteria. And within each of these criteria, you'll see in the RFA, it's broken down further into 3 to 5 criterion that are weighted based on the value of each of those criteria. So this is something also that's new this year. In the past, we've just provided this table in the RFA. We didn't break it down by individual criterion and included the score for each of those. So I'm really excited about this piece because the criteria line up directly with the narrative questions. So you'll notice as you go through that question 1 in the narrative is directly related to criteria 1 in the scoring criteria. And so you can see which questions have more value and which questions have less value. So you can make some decisions around how you use your time and energy in really completing the application and what we're looking for in a successful app, in a high quality application. There's also a description of each of the scoring descriptors. So what missing means, what does not meet means, working towards, etc. There's a description of that so you know what you can expect to get already based on your answers to the questions in the narrative. Okay. So let's loop back to the competitive preference piece. If you remember, this is a new, oops, sorry, y'all. Go back somehow. Okay. Let's go back and talk about the competitive preference, which is a new element that we've added to the pre-award phase. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 groups of eligible organizations that can apply for a grant. There are schools and there are community-based organizations. In order for schools to receive competitive preference, that school needs to have 1 or 2 star rating and have not received a school-run grant in the past 5 years. In order for a community-based organization to receive competitive preference, they must partner exclusively, so that's the key word, with schools earning 1 or 2 star ratings and have not received a school garden grant in the past 5 years. And the reason why exclusively is important is because remember that CBOs can include up to 4 schools per application. So all of those schools in the application must meet the school competitive preference requirement in order for that application to be to meet the competitive preference. So if I show you, what I want to do is take you to the School Garden Grant page. This is where you can get the most updated information. It's the 2019-21 School Garden Grant documents. This is the hyperlink that is included in the RFA and also at the beginning of this webinar. And you're going to click on 2019-21, and you'll see the RFA is here. You'll see my contact information is here, and then you'll see the RFA here as well as a PDF, and then you'll see the competitive preference guide. So this guide is available for you. I recommend that you look at it. It has an overview of what the competitive preference is. It has some Q&A to help clarify competitive preference. One thing I want to highlight is that those of you that are associated with schools that do not meet the competitive preference requirement, we want to be clear that we encourage you to apply, because up to 50% of our school garden grants will be awarded to applicants that do not receive the competitive preference. Okay, so we want folks to really continue to submit great applications, because we will be awarding up to 50% to non-competitive preference schools. And then there's a list of all of the schools that are eligible to receive competitive preference for this grant cycle. So if you're a community-based organization and you want to submit a competitive preference application, or you want to know what schools meet the requirements, here's the list of those schools for you to look at. Okay, it's all right here for you. All right. What I want to do, I'm going to go back to I'm kind of going back and forth here. I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to unmute to see if there's any questions. We're almost finished, to see if there's any questions about competitive preference. I should just also say one last thing, that the reason for this competitive preference is that we would like to have more equitable distribution of school garden grants among schools, and we also want to have more high quality garden-based experiences for students and staff across diverse communities. So that's the reason. And just to give an example again, assuming that there's 8 total school garden grantees that are awarded, at least 4 of those grantees would be selected from the competitive preference categories, and up to 4 would be awarded to non-competitive preference. Okay, I think I've gotten that point across. A couple more slides and then we're done. So just an overview of the application review process. Again, the deadline is September 4th at 3 p.m. You must submit through the EGMS system. Late applications will not be accepted. Once we receive applications, they'll be reviewed and scored by an external review panel, and we are planning on making award announcements before October 1st. And then this goes sort of beyond the scope of the pre-award phase, but just to let folks know, if they are awarded, it's a reimbursement grant, so you must submit reimbursement requests and proof of payment. Again, we'll reimburse up to a maximum of 60% and a minimum of 40% in year 1. And just a reminder that eligible fiscal sponsors, meaning entities that can receive funds from OSSI, would be a DCPS Central Office, the Central Office of Public Charter Schools, CBOs, and CBOs that support school garden programs. And parent-teacher organizations that have a nonprofit status, so the tax ID number, they would fall under CBO that supports school garden programs. Okay, and then just a last slide here. This was earlier in the presentation to remind folks of the important dates of the grant. Okay, so I want to open it up now for any questions. I'm going to unmute. So there's a question about if you're a school submitting an application, can you pay the fees of the partner organization? So can you include like any fees or staffing fees of a partner organization? Can you include that in your application? Absolutely, yes. So again, the staffing structure we're not going to dictate, and you can basically sub award grant awards. You can have a sub-recipient of our grant. You can serve as the pass-through entity as a school to a partner organization. And then there's a question around the garden coordinator requirement, and to give a few examples. So that's a great question. In the RFA, there's a link to garden coordinator framework is what it's called, and it provides some essential duties of a garden coordinator. So you can use that to guide you as you create a description of that position and start to think through what the roles and responsibilities of that person would be. Can you give an example of a grant that failed or didn't do well after getting the funds? That's a great question. I think that, well, what I would say is most grants fail due to lack of communication and not managing expectations between the partner organization and the school. And that is compounded when the school is leaning heavily on a partner organization to complete the majority of the requirements, and that wasn't made clear, or something happened like major staff turnover within the school where that partner organization can no longer do the work, or there's one person in the school that's really heavily dependent, and then that person leaves, and then the school isn't able to backfill that position. That often happens. But again, I'm able to provide support, so I try to identify those needs before it gets too bad, and it's up to you to communicate that to me so I can help. Can you elaborate on the mentoring aspect? When and how are schools matched? So the mentoring mentee piece is very new. I, to be honest, haven't thought through every detail of this, but I'm planning on establishing the mentor-mentee relationship during the first community of practice training, which will take place in the late fall, early winter of this year. And there'll be more to come on that, and I'll give out more information to folks that are awarded the grant on that. So just the last question here that I have so far is, can I discuss a little bit more about curriculum aligned to relevant standards? Does OSSI have a curriculum to use? Again, so OSSI doesn't dictate what curriculum you use, but we do provide a vetted curriculum and recommendation list that's linked in the RFA that you can look at and decide what's going to work for you. And you feel free to use multiple curriculums or not use a curriculum that's on that list that works for you, but please in your narrative explain your rationale for selecting a curriculum and how that curriculum will be used. And take some time to look through. A lot of the curriculums are free and they're available online, so you can really do some research and look through them to see what's going to work best. Okay, that's all the questions that I have. So again, thank you all so much for participating, and look forward to reading your fantastic applications. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. I will be out of town from July 1st through July 11th, However, if you do email me, you'll receive my out of office that will have the contact information from my colleague who is very familiar with this grant and can help you answer most questions. Otherwise, I can answer your questions when I return. All right, have a great day, everybody, and good luck and take care. Thanks, bye.